know that a surprising number of objects you use every day are thanks to accidents? Let me show you what I mean. On this episode, we discover the lengths people will go to for a sweet treat.
People were risking jail time for a sugar substitute.
Learn how a renegade scientist saved the planet.
They even threatened to fire him.
And find out the way that mold juice protects humanity.
Mold juice?
Oops, I changed the world. Sweet treats. Chocolate. Gobstoppers. Cookies. Donuts. Pie. Sugar, sugar, sugar. We humans can't get enough of the good stuff.
Chocolate ice cream, you know, a tub of chocolate ice cream.
New York cheesecake. Oh, man. It's like love on a plate.
We know too much is unhealthy, but sugar is in almost everything we eat. A 2013 survey revealed that some 74% of food products in the US contain added sugar. And it's being added in for good reason.
When sugar hits your tongue, it sends a telephone message up to your brain, which releases dopamine and which says, I'm happy.
So we love sugar, but sugar's bad for us. That sounds like a problem for which we need a solution.
We may already have one, Suze. The answer comes from a small Maryland laboratory more than 100 years ago, with the accidental discovery of the world's first artificial sweetener, saccharin.
The first artificial sweetener is over a century old. How come we're still drowning in sugar?
Good question. The story of saccharin and its impact on us is one of highs and lows. Influenced by taxation, dodgy scientific opinion, smugglers, and the all-powerful sugar barons. But let's start at the beginning, when the sugar cane migrated from New Guinea up to India.
India first refined sugar thousands of years ago, and it makes a long, slow journey towards Europe, addicting people along the way.
The Romans use it for medicinal purposes, and then
we can thank the Knights Templar for bringing it into the heart of Europe as a new addiction.
to begin with, it's only the rich that can eat this new delight.
And the poor are so envious and wanting to be in on the act that they'll even blacken their teeth to pretend that they've been eating sugar.
Such is the allure of sugar that there's some serious money to be made.
Expeditions are sent out to the New World to create new sugar plantations.
Sugar is seen as white gold. British colonies produce over 1 million tons, which sells for a premium back home, where the high society laps it up.
While the rich get their sweet treats, it's the vulnerable who pay the price.
Sugar production drives the slave trade. The European transatlantic slave trade transports as many as 12 million enslaved Africans just to maintain these enterprises.
The Caribbean, much of South America, and the southern United States are all shaped by sugarcane plantations.
The slaves were the absolute property of their masters.
The next seismic shift in the sugar story happens in the 19th century.
The centre of it was this diminutive Frenchman, Napoleon, who was terrorising the whole of Europe. Now, the problem for him was that he wasn't able to get sugar supplies out of the Caribbean while he was fighting Britain, Russia, and everybody else. So what he started to do was to grow a crop called sugar beet.
It's a root vegetable, like a turnip. It grows in the ground, it doesn't need tropical conditions, it doesn't look very appetizing, but it's surprisingly sweet.
And what Napoleon was able to do was effectively flood the market with this new homegrown sugar. And it meant that working class people and the peasantry were able to enjoy sugary treats for the first time.
And so, it's against this sugary background that a young Russian scientist, Konstantin Thalberg, is about to change everything all over again. In Baltimore, a shipment of 712 sacks of sugar has just been impounded by the US government over questions of purity.
The US government thought that the Demerara sugar was actually higher in quality than they had actually disclosed. So the company gets a German chemist involved, Konstantin Thalberg.
Which is how Thalberg finds himself sharing a lab with another chemist, Professor Ira Remsen. The two become fascinated by coal tar derivatives.
Coal tar, it sounds pretty disgusting. And it kind of is. It's this like dark black liquid remnants from processing coal.
But who among us can truly say that they aren't fascinated by coal tar derivatives, hey? All right, please yourselves.
It's actually got a lot of medicinal properties: antifungal, anti-inflammatory, anti-parasitic. It's even listed as an essential medicine by the World Health Organization.
This weird mixture of chemicals fascinates Remsen and Thalberg. Together, they work on a specific derivative called O-toluene sulfonic acid.
One of the key things that chemists do is react and change molecules.
It's kind of like Lego and swapping bits and pieces around.
He adds ammonia to the reaction, and that's where things get interesting.
Thalberg is so absorbed with his work, tinkering around with chemicals, that one evening he nearly misses dinner.
But he dashes back after a cursory wash of his hands, and he's eating bread at the table when he thinks, gosh, this is really sweet. As my housekeeper put sugar in the bread or something, it just tastes very odd. And he accuses her of putting sugar into his food.
When she denies it, there's only one logical explanation.
He starts thinking that the unexpected taste must have come from one of the experiments that he was running.
So what does he do? He does what any good scientist would do: gather data. He goes back to the lab and tastes every single substance that was out in a beaker.
That's definitely not what every good scientist would do.
Kids, don't try this at home.
This isn't just reckless, it's desperate. Thalberg needs to know where the sweet taste has come from.
He figures out that the reaction with the O-toluene sulfonic acid is what has created this taste. Thalberg realizes that this new compound is incredibly sweet. It's 500 times sweeter than sugar.
So it seems appropriate when Thalberg decides to take the Latin word for sugar to name the new product, saccharin.
Thalberg decides he needs to test this new saccharin scientifically.
So he takes about 1/3 of an ounce himself. That's the taste equivalent of 11 pounds of sugar.
Which was probably a bit too sweet. But there's some very good news.
He discovers that it all passes through his body unchanged. He was able to collect it from his urine. This is really important because if the body doesn't metabolize it, then it's probably safe to eat.
Which means, of course, that it doesn't have any calorific value. Saccharin literally shoves through you, giving you all the pleasure of sugar and none of the guilt.
Thalberg knows he's onto something because the applications are vast, helping diabetics, making bitter medicines more palatable, the food packing and preservation industry, making sugary food healthy, and losing weight.
By 1879, Thalberg is almost ready to bring the new wonder product to market.
Saccharin is a co-discovery between Remsen and Thalberg, and nobody doubts that, but Thalberg is, shall we say, the more entrepreneurial of the two gentlemen, and he goes and registers patents in the United States and Europe, and somehow he neglects to mention this to Remsen, who finds out and is absolutely hopping mad.
I'm hopping mad!
Remsen calls Thalberg a scoundrel. The two never make up, but Thalberg is making too much money to care.
Saccharin goes into mass production, and it's a big success.
While saccharin's more expensive to produce than sugar, it's 500 times sweeter. So you need a lot less of it to get the same effect. This makes it hugely profitable, which doesn't go down well with the sugar barons.
Sugar producers are in a great spot. They control a valuable commodity that has a huge market. The last thing they want is a new product like saccharin coming in and disrupting their trade and taking away their customers.
So they lobby governments hard, first of all, to get it restricted to purely medicinal purposes sold through pharmacies. And then, when that doesn't seem to work, they just go for an outright ban.
Governments bend to the demands of big sugar. Saccharin becomes almost impossible to manufacture and trade.
And even though governments all over Europe are moving against saccharin, Europeans, the public, want it.
And we all know that if you ban something the public wants, the public finds a way. Huge smuggling operations find ingenious means of concealing the sweet white gold as it passes through customs.
They find a way of incorporating saccharin into holy candles, which are duly consecrated by priests taken out of the country, past border guards who suspect nothing, and then those candles are melted down and the saccharin extracted for sale.
I mean, it sounds ridiculous. People were risking jail time for a sugar substitute.
And over in America, things aren't going much better for saccharin.
There's growing concern in the United States in the early 20th century over food adulteration, and it leads to legislation, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. And there's a government chemist, Harvey Wiley, and he really takes against saccharin.
Wiley believes that anything derived from coal tar just can't be good, especially if it has no nutritional value, which saccharin, of course, doesn't.
But the food processing industry loves saccharin. It allows them to enhance flavour in their tinned products on the cheap.
Wiley and the food industry then are completely at loggerheads, and they take their argument to the president, to Theodore or Teddy Roosevelt, who is not a slim man by any stretch of the imagination.
What Wiley doesn't know is that Roosevelt has been prescribed saccharin by his doctor to help with his expanding waistline.
And when he's presented with the arguments, Roosevelt rounds at Wiley and says anybody who opposes saccharin is an idiot.
That told him.
During World War I, the farmers had to switch their crops from sugar beets to wheat and potatoes.
With war comes rationing.
This business of ration stamps and price ceilings is no cinch for him.
And a cheap, easy-to-produce sweetener is seen as a candle in the dark.
So from vilifying saccharin, politicians now endorse its production, and it goes from practically 0 to 250 tons. And the same happens again in World War II. It's saccharin to the rescue.
From the 1950s onwards, America grows rich. Access to sugary foods is suddenly easy, and most people have to do less hard physical labour.
Served in good, generous slices.
The masses start to grow, quite literally, and it's saccharin to the rescue yet again.
In 1963, Weight Watchers is founded and sees immediate and rapid growth. Within 2 years, the owner, Gene Needage, is a millionaire.
I thought fat men were supposed to be jolly. They are jolly. They're jolly on the outside. For once, I took a picture of what I really felt like.
Now, over 140 years after Thalberg's accidental discovery, saccharin remains one of the most popular artificial sweeteners on the planet.
You'll find it in those little sweet and low single-serve packets in cafes and restaurants. Over 500 billion packets have been produced to date.
Coming up, the plan to take over the planet.
If we can create a laser, we could fire Soviet nukes out of the sky.
And the world's worst sales tactic.
He aims the gun at his stomach and pulls the trigger.
But first this, planet Earth. From all the way out here, it's hard to see the human's impact on this pale blue dot in space. But as the sun dips below the horizon, billions of pinpoints of light switch on, revealing our modern illuminated world. This planet is covered with intelligent life that has harnessed electricity and used it to power the world. From the bright city centres of New York to the nighttime fishing in the South China Sea.
It's almost like a map of technological progress. You can see cities, you can see civilizations clustering together in places like the Eastern Seaboard in America and in Western Europe. You can see where humanity butts up against geography, like in the foothills of the Himalayas.
You can see in an image like this that there's no doubt about it. We love light.
The spread of artificial light across the globe is possible because of a brilliant new technology that revolutionises how we make light, the light-emitting diode.
That's also known as the LED to you and me.
Now, we all know that there were electronic lights before LEDs. You've probably heard of their inventor, a gentleman called Thomas Edison.
There were light bulbs before Edison, but his genius was the fact that he made it commercially viable. And he did this with a year of hard work. He went through 6,000 different materials for the filament of the bulb before he found one that he could sell at a reasonable price.
Edison's inventions spread light and electricity across the world. It may seem like a small thing, but the light bulb changed the course of humanity.
They have made us independent of the seasons. We now don't go to bed when the sun goes down, we go to bed when we want, and facilitated the electrical revolution, because when you run wires in for electricity for lighting, that means there's electricity available for all manner of gadgets and gizmos.
Say there, sport.
What are you going to do with all of it?
Do with it? Honey, there's no limit.
The incandescent light bulb remains the dominant light source for the rest of the century.
I really admire the way you never cast harsh shadows.
But light bulbs are far from perfect.
An electrical current is passed through a very thin wire known as a filament. The filament heats up, glowing bright white, lighting up a room.
1.5 pounds of tungsten in this lamp would make filaments for 21 million grain of wheat lamps.
But unfortunately, 97% of the energy that goes through the wire is converted to heat, with only 3% left for light. This is incredibly inefficient.
The more light bulbs we use, the more energy we waste. It's a pretty big deal to work out if we can do this more efficiently.
And that is where tie-hating Nick Holonyak comes into our story.
Holonyak's born in 1928 in southern Illinois in a small community. His parents have emigrated to the US from what's now Ukraine. His father's working in the mining industry. It's a typical blue-collar story where he could have very easily ended up in the same job, going underground and mining, instead of which he sets his sights much, much higher.
At the end of World War II, universities across the US start rapidly growing. It's the opportunity that Holonyak's been waiting for.
Holonyak studies electrical engineering at the University of Illinois and ends up working with none other than John Bardeen, the co-inventor of the semiconductor transistor and the winner of not one, but 2 Nobel Prizes.
2? That's just showing off. Anyway, Holignac graduates, gets a job, joins the military, and eventually finds himself working for General Electric.
On to General Electric Progress Land.
This is a sack alert.
This is the era of the Cold War. It's when the United States and the Soviet Union are matching up to each other, the Cuban Missiles Crisis. Huge paranoia. People are starting to think, well, if we can create a laser, we could fire Soviet nukes out of the sky.
Holignac's colleagues are experimenting with semiconductor diodes to create a miniaturized laser.
A laser is really the secret ray of science fiction come true. It's an invisible beam of very high energy.
The problem is the team are producing lasers that emit only infrared wavelengths of light, which is longer than the wavelengths of light that we can see with our eyes. Whereas Holignac wants to make a laser that produces visible light.
Holignac thinks that his best bet for making a visible laser lies in the research of another group at General Electric. They're working with compounds that can give off red light, crystals made from gallium and arsenide.
His bosses try and persuade him to stick to the classic silicon rather than his obsession with gallium crystals. They even threaten to fire him.
But Holignac ignores this. He's convinced that he's onto something and eventually becomes the first person in the world to grow crystals mixing gallium arsenide and gallium phosphide.
Holignac uses his new crystals in a laser. He's expecting a powerful red beam to blast out of his experiment.
And it works. Kind of.
It's not the powerful, coherent light that you would get from a laser, but instead, well, kind of more regular light. In fact, what Holignac's made is, accidentally, the world's first commercially viable red LED.
Okay, it's not the laser he was expecting, but this is a totally new way of making light, and it's all down to how diodes are constructed. Strap yourselves in for some exciting science.
So you have two materials, the N and the P. The N is what's referred to as negatively charged. It has an excess of electrons. The P side has a dearth of electrons. It doesn't have enough of them.
Okay, it's not really as exciting as we hoped. But if you zap the diode with some volts, the electrons travel from the N material to the P material, releasing energy.
This energy is released in the form of a photon, or a little bit of light.
This process is incredibly efficient. Just a small amount of electricity makes lots of light. And that's not the only thing. Due to their solid-state structure, LEDs last about 25 times longer than incandescent bulbs.
Like the divine creator, Thomas Edison said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The trouble was, it was energy inefficient. Holignac comes along and he says, "Let there be light," but this time it's energy efficient.
Doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Anyway, General Electric immediately see the potential of Holignac's red LED, calling his experiment the magic one, and within a year it's on the market.
Trouble is, it's a tiny little light that costs $260. Now, in today's money, that's over $2,000, and there's not a lot of demand for a little light that costs that amount of money.
But over the next few years, that cost comes tumbling down.
This red light LED technology soon becomes an incredible way to display numerical data. Wherever numbers have to be displayed.
And what uses numbers? Calculators and watches. And why wouldn't you want to have a watch that has LEDs in? The technology is amazing. But if it's going to be practically used in everyday life, then red isn't enough. If you want to replace the incandescent light bulb, we need white light.
It takes another 20 years for Japanese scientists to find the right combination of crystals to emit that elusive blue light.
They've cracked the holy grail of LED lights.
So we now have small red lights and small blue lights. But while they're examining their new invention more closely, something unexpected happens.
The team wants to take a closer look at their LED, and so they use an electron microscope, which is a highly powerful microscope, to examine it. The LED suddenly starts to shine even more brightly.
Of course, when you're making an LED, that's exactly what you want. The problem is the team have no idea why it happened.
The team from the east look west for their answer, but just 150 miles west to Shikoku Island, where a scientist called Shuji Nakamura tackles the problem.
Nakamura realized that the electron microscope was making the LED shine much brighter by removing hydrogen atoms from the top of the P-type crystal.
I'm not really sure what that means either, but I do know that when he fine-tunes the process, Nakamura manages to make the blue LED 100 times brighter.
So finally, we can produce white light and replace incandescent bulbs. It only took 30 years of development.
Oh, but hang on there, Simon. This is still a huge moment that stems from an accident.
LED screens are rapidly developed and adopted in all kinds of everyday technology.
We take for granted, video and amazing images on our smartphones, on our laptops, on our tablets. But, only just 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that wasn't possible.
Edison's light bulb lit the 20th century, but LED light bulbs are dominating the 21st.
In 2019, about half of all light sources were LED. Now, by 2030, it's predicted that will be 85%. That's absolutely staggering for a technology that's relatively new.
And that's how an immigrant son from Illinois lit up the world.
I guess this story proves that no matter how humble your beginnings, if you're truly dedicated, you can affect real technological change by using this thing up here. And that's what Hong Yak did. He really changed the world.
Still to come, how a hard-nosed pizza shop owner helps save thousands of lives.
This time, he goes packing a piece.
But first, let's take a moment to consider that ever since humans have walked the Earth, we've waged a deadly war against a formidable foe.
Natural disasters?
No.
Is it woolly mammoths?
Nope.
What about hunger?
Good guess, but I'm talking about bacteria.
Ew.
When these microscopic invaders get inside, they take hold of your body and multiply and multiply, sending your immune system haywire, until finally you turn into a zombie. Actually, you'd most likely just die.
Probably couldn't name one bacteria, but what you could name are all of the diseases that bacteria causes, things like the bubonic plague. You get tetanus, cholera, things that have ravaged humanity for thousands of years.
And over the years, humans have come up with some pretty gruesome ways to fight infection. In ancient Egypt, doctors believed that bloodletting's the magic weapon against bacterial infection, a practice lasting into the 20th century.
So back in the day, doctors thought that if we were sick, our humours were out of balance. There were these 4 humours: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm.
What was needed was a doctor, a physician to come along, make an incision and bleed you to get your humours rebalanced.
Fast forward to the 1920s, and humans still have no suitable treatment in their fight against bacteria. Each year, the lung infection tuberculosis devastates populations. Millions are killed.
Just gone.
The treatment for TB at the time was fresh air.
Fresh air? I mean, seriously, you don't stand a chance.
We have this ancient war between bacteria and humanity, and frankly, bacteria was winning for most of history. It was something of a massacre.
But all that is about to change with an untidy scientist, a watermelon-obsessed woman, and some lucky guinea pigs. No, your ears aren't deceiving you. Stay with me on this one. The story starts in 1922, London, England, and with this guy, Alexander Fleming.
Sir Alexander Fleming of St Mary's Hospital, London, a miracle out of mould.
Born in Scotland, Fleming moves south to study medicine at St Mary's Hospital, where he soon becomes fascinated with the emerging field of bacteriology.
That's the study of bacteria.
Yeah, they knew that one.
He's looking for new ways to kill bacteria, and he's basically adding anything that he can to bacterial cultures.
The story goes that he has an absolutely rotten cold. He accidentally sneezes on a Petri dish. Not exactly scientific, you would think, but what he observes is really interesting.
Interesting.
Because where the mucus has landed, the bacteria die.
Fleming realises that it's an enzyme in saliva called lysozyme that's killing the bacteria, which sounds great. But while it works in a Petri dish, it doesn't work as well inside the body. Despite 6 more years of promising research, Fleming hits a wall. He decides it's time for a vacation. Returning 2 weeks later, rested and ready to work again.
And when he comes back, he notices something weird growing in his lab.
On one of the plates, there's a big blob of a mysterious fungus.
Fleming's lab, it seems, was a bit of a mess.
It's mould, basically. Disgusting mould from his dirty lab.
Normally, if you're doing an experiment and it becomes contaminated with fungus, you would throw it away. But Fleming, ever the curious scientist, sees something funny that's really quite small and subtle where the fungus meets the bacteria.
That's funny.
What he notices will change the world forever.
The bacteria around the fungus are all dead. Now, given that Staphylococcus is a deadly bacteria, whatever this mold is producing has managed to kill it. This is a huge discovery.
Fleming immediately sets to work isolating the fungus and producing samples of mold juice.
Mold juice?
Yes, mold juice.
It's not the white layer you see on the top, but the liquid beneath it.
And it turns out this isn't any old mold juice.
Mold juice?
Yes, Tony, but this is mighty mold juice. Not only does it kill Staphylococcus, but it's effective against other harmful bacteria, including Meningococcus and Diphtheria bacillus.
As you can see here, quite well with the naked eye. Here are some of them.
Fleming names the active ingredient penicillin. He needs to extract it and purify it before he can test it in animals and humans to see whether it works.
So it turns out isolating the penicillin from this moldy broth is easier said than done.
Despite their best efforts, Fleming and his team could extract barely any penicillin and abandon their work.
It's so frustrating because Fleming knows penicillin's in there, but he just can't get his hands on it.
And so nothing happens for another decade. It's 1939, and there's a war on, don't you know? Pathologist Howard Florey and biochemist Ernst Chain are in Oxford University searching for antibacterial substances.
Chain stumbles onto Fleming's work, and immediately they start to try to extract this penicillin substance.
By May 1940, after months of hard graft, they've managed what Fleming couldn't and extracted a small amount of brown powder.
That brown powder contains the active ingredient. This is the first successful attempt at extracting the penicillin. Now, of course, you can't take this new drug and just start injecting it into humans. You got to test it on some other organism.
And what better animal to use as a guinea pig than a guinea pig?
However, they have such a tiny amount that they decide to use a proportionally smaller test subject, mice.
Oh, okay then, mice. They inoculate 8 mice with a lethal dose of streptococci bacteria and then inject 4 of them with penicillin.
24 hours later, the results are astonishing. There's only 4 mice who are alive, and they all had penicillin.
That is a 100% success rate. It's another stroke of luck that they tested it on mice, as later it's discovered that penicillin is toxic to guinea pigs.
If they had tested on guinea pigs and they had dropped dead so quickly, the entire project probably would have been halted.
Good for guinea pigs, and good for the future of mankind.
The next step is to test it in humans.
But there's a problem. So far, the team have barely managed to purify enough to test on mice.
Foley and Chain end up using anything to hand to grow mould in, and that might be the bath or a bedpan or a jam jar or any vessel that they can get.
And it's all looked after by this group of women who are called the penicillin girls.
They're filling bottles with the medium in which will grow the mold that produces penicillin.
Eventually, they think they have enough to test on a human subject.
So they're a little bit nervous about whether or not this is going to be poisonous to people.
They pick a patient who's in such a bad way that penicillin is their only hope.
Police Constable Albert Alexander's been severely wounded in an air raid by the Luftwaffe, and basically there's swelling in his head. He's already lost one eye, the other one has been lanced, so he's pretty much blind, but he's in terrible agony, desperate for some kind of cure.
They administer the penicillin.
Within 24 hours, there's a dramatic improvement. The swelling is gone down.
They're making great headway treating the police officer, but the problem is they don't have enough penicillin to finish the course. And sadly, he passes away.
So if one entire laboratory can't make enough penicillin to treat just one patient, how are we going to treat the whole world?
Well, Suze, with a little something called teamwork.
Foley comes to America to petition 4 big pharmaceutical companies to pool their resources and to help manufacture penicillin.
But even the combined might of Big Pharma find penicillin hard to produce.
One of the lead scientists in the United States is completely exasperated. He has a big outburst. He just says the mold is as temperamental as an opera singer.
So it takes over 400 gallons of culture medium to make enough penicillin to treat just one patient. That's over 5 bathtubs full. So what they actually need is a different strain that likes growing submerged in these vats.
Enter Mary Hunt, a woman with the unenviable nickname of Mouldy Mary. With an eagle eye for spotting novel fungi in the wild, she's tasked with finding a more productive strain of penicillium.
On her travels, Mouldy Mary comes across a fruit and vegetable stall. She spies a cantaloupe melon, which has a particularly virulent mold on it with a kind of goldy tinge.
The shop owner doesn't want to give up this mouldy melon because they might get a reputation for selling bad food, but Mouldy Mary, in the end, gets her way.
The golden mould proves to be the golden ticket. It produces 1,000 times more penicillin than Fleming's original strain. And it's not a moment too soon. The Allied forces are gathering for the invasion and recapture of Europe. Over 150,000 troops are about to put their lives on the line for D-Day.
The Allies are expecting huge casualties, so this is the first real big test for this new drug.
They produce 2 million doses and it's shipped to the front line.
All penicillin produced is used by the Allied fighting forces. The liquid now charged with penicillin is poured from the bottles. Turned into a powder, it is ready for use.
The rollout of penicillin into the battlefield is a huge success. Thousands of lives are saved.
You would see some of the men who've been meeting the enemy direct. This fighter pilot, for instance.
So much so, it gives medics a new problem to solve.
Soldiers who would have previously basically died of their injuries are now surviving. But for doctors, that presents a new challenge, how to effectively rebuild them, with the terrible injuries that they've suffered. Now is the advent of plastic surgery.
After the war, penicillin manufacture is expanded further, driving down the cost from $20 per 100,000 units to less than 10 cents.
Everybody wants penicillin because now a bacterial infection that could have meant death could lead to a miracle recovery.
Penicillin kicks off a medical revolution that completely transforms the fortunes of the human race.
Scientists across the globe are now racing to find all kinds of new antibiotics. The period between the 1950s and 1970s is like the golden era of antibiotic discoveries.
The tide is turning against bacteria. These deadly diseases like tuberculosis can now be cured, and we're saving millions of lives.
Humans finally have a super weapon in their fight against bacteria. But like in any arms race, the opposition is fighting back.
It's up to us to carry that torch that Fleming and Foley and Chain lit all those years ago and carry the legacy of antibiotics into the future.
July 20th, 1969. Neil Armstrong is the first person to set foot on the surface of the moon.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
It's such an iconic moment in human history, a triumph of human ingenuity.
It's taken hundreds of innovations to make this moment possible. Advances in rocket engineering, planetary physics, and one chance discovery that's literally woven into the fabric of Armstrong's spacesuit.
The Apollo spacesuits, much like today's spacesuits, are made of more than 20 layers of different materials. They create a protective shell for the astronaut.
An incredibly reliable, custom-tailored, hand-assembled life support system.
NASA engineers need to make sure these spacesuits are impregnable, unbreakable, and completely puncture-proof. The material they turn to is Kevlar.
Wait a minute, you mean to say Kevlar was an accident?
Yes, but the story of Kevlar isn't a straightforward one. This indestructible material was accidentally created while scientists were trying to make lighter road tyres. Let's start at the beginning. It's the middle of the 1960s, and Lyndon Johnson is president, Mary Poppins is smashing the box office, and Pontiac has just released the GTO, America's first commercially available muscle car.
You can just imagine the roar of the V8 engines. It kind of was like the soundtrack of America in that time. The muscle car embodies that sense of American freedom and power.
The problem is that cars around this time are gas guzzlers, averaging just 10 miles per gallon. And America's use of gas is climbing year on year. From 1950 to 1970, US gasoline consumption more than doubles, from 40 billion gallons to nearly 90. So to try and make cars more efficient, DuPont set themselves the task of replacing the wire inside tyres with a synthetic fibre that will make cars lighter and therefore use less fuel.
At the heart of the team is an amazing chemist named Stephanie Kwolek.
It was a fraternity of excellence.
Which is how Kwolek finds herself looking for new synthetic fibres made from polymers.
To turn your polymer into a fiber, you push it through a series of tiny tubes less than 1/1000th of an inch across called spinnerets. Once you've done that, you can then collect those onto bobbins, and that collects them into threads, which can be woven into a fabric.
Qualic's busy dissolving the chemical ingredients of a brand new polymer in solvent when something unexpected happens.
Typically speaking, polymerization products are usually clear and a little bit gloopy. But what Qualic has created is opaque, milky, and actually really quite runny. You'd expect that a solution like this would be thrown out immediately, because it looks like a reaction that has gone quite wrong.
But while it looks wrong, Qualic is sure her chemistry's solid.
She was determined to try and put her new substance through the spinnerets and see if she could make something.
But the spinneret technicians don't want to risk running such a wrong-looking solution through their precision machinery. Nevertheless, Qualic eventually gets her way.
Please? Please?
They load it up into the machine, get the machine spinning, and lo and behold, strong, stiff fibers start to get released.
It's a surprise that it makes a material at all. But there's even better news.
And this isn't any fiber. Tests show that it is the strongest fiber they've ever seen, 5 times stronger than steel. But it's not just strong, it's light, and it's highly heat resistant. It doesn't get brittle at low temperatures, and it also doesn't melt until 800 degrees Fahrenheit. It's basically the wonder material that they've been looking for.
It looks like Qualic's mistake could be the perfect material for lighter tyres.
Its chemical name is polyparaphenylene terephthalamide, which is a bit of a mouthful, so they trademark it as Kevlar.
The secret of why Kevlar's so strong is in its molecular makeup.
The amazing thing about Kevlar is that it's made up of these individual polymers that themselves are quite pliable and really quite weak. But if you take lots of them together, combine them, then it becomes very strong.
DuPont start to roll out their Kevlar tyres, but there are bigger things ahead. This wonder material is about to become a lifesaver. It just so happens, a troubling crime trend is spreading across America.
Take cover. A basic rule for survival against hostile fire.
From 1966 to 1971, annual police officer fatalities double from 57 to 129. The majority of these homicides are inflicted by handguns. The National Institute of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice initiates a program to find a suitable lightweight body armor.
On the back of this program, an entrepreneurial civilian called Richard Davis is about to get into the bulletproof vest business.
Davis, a former US Marine, owns a pizza shop in a dodgy part of Detroit. One evening, running a delivery, he's robbed at gunpoint by 3 men.
A week later, Davis gets a call to deliver to the same address.
This time, he goes packing a piece.
He was right to. The robbers try again and a gunfight breaks out. He wounds his attackers, but gets hit himself. While recovering from his injuries, his pizza shop is burned down.
Davis only has $70 to his name. But he's heard of DuPont's new Kevlar and buys enough fabric to fashion his own bulletproof vest. Davis's challenge is figuring out how to market his new product.
Davis isn't the first person to make a bulletproof vest, and he certainly isn't an established name in the arms trade. But what he does have on his side is a flair for marketing.
He set up a demo for local police departments, his key clientele, and starts by shooting his vest with various weapons. The vest works, it captures the bullets.
Which is fine, but Davis is about to pull out the showstopper.
He puts the vest on and he aims the gun at his stomach and pulls the trigger.
Easy as pie, guys.
Luckily, he's okay, apart from a massive bruise.
Davis's stunt works. He secures lucrative contracts to supply his vest to the local police departments. He goes on the road, selling his vest using the same high-risk party trick.
Davis went on to say that the first time he shot himself, it was for science. Subsequent 200 times were just showmanship.
Today, a Kevlar vest is standard issue for police officers, and over 3,000 lives have been saved. Over the decades, Kevlar technology has matured and found hundreds of different uses.
The uses of Kevlar now seem limitless, and it's used in, for example, competitive sports, where people are always looking for new materials to get a competitive edge. Kevlar's used in tennis rackets, sailing boats, sails, canoes, even running shoes. The aerospace industry has also enthusiastically taken up Kevlar because of its combination of being lightweight and incredibly strong.
As well as being used in spacesuits, Kevlar finds its way into a whole host of other space tech.
Bulletproofing the entire International Space Station against tiny, fast-moving pieces of debris. Kevlar is basically used everywhere.
In 1986, Stephanie Kwolek finally retires from DuPont after 40 years of loyal service.
Kwolek's no one-trick pony because when it comes to fibers, she is the queen. She's created fire-retardant Nomex and also the super stretchy Lycra that we all love, from yoga to running.
But it's still her accidental invention of Kevlar that's had the greatest impact on the world.